Most perennial food lists sound great until you realize the plants take years to produce anything. These 7 are going to feed you fast, some in their very first season, and the first one gives you endless free scallions from spaces this small. Let me show you. If you grow in a small space, evergreen bunching onions might be the single most valuable perennial you can plant. You harvest them as cut and come again scallions, leave the roots in the ground, and they just keep on coming back for years. No replanting, no fuss, and they fit into every tiny corner of your garden. I've grown evergreen bunching onions in every garden I've had here in upstate South Carolina, and when I downsized into my smaller space right here with raised beds and containers, I turned to them again because I needed crops that would pay me back fast. They handle our heat, they survive freezes, they multiply on their own, and they give me fresh scallions for the majority of the year. I use scallions constantly in soups, stir fries, eggs, tacos, potatoes, etc., and having a perennial supply means that I never run out. These don't form bulbs like storage onions do. All their energy goes into tender greens that you can harvest repeatedly. In colder climates, they're a hardy perennial that returns in early spring. The fastest cut and come regrowth with evergreen bunching onions comes when you harvest about 1 to 2 inches above the soil line, but they multiply in 2 different ways. Clumping at the base, where one plant becomes many plants over time, and self-seeding if you let some of the stalks flower. Pollinators love the blooms, and once the seed heads dry, they just drop seeds into the soil, and then you'll start seeing tiny scallion seedlings along the edges, which are completely free new plants that you can move, thin, or just let them naturalize. And with a little protection like a cold frame or a row cover, they may keep producing through the winter in many climates, or at least stay partially harvestable. Now, if bunching onions give you endless scallions from tiny spaces, blueberries are going to give you even more, and that's grocery store expensive fruit that pays you back for decades. But there's a secret most gardeners miss. If you want a perennial that gives you a huge return on investment, not years from now, but much sooner, blueberries are the one, but the secret isn't just choosing the right variety for your climate. It's buying the right age of plant so that you're not waiting half a decade for fruit. Most gardeners don't realize how much plant age determines your harvest timeline. If you start with 1-year-old plants, you might wait 3 to 5 years for big production and closer to 6 for full harvests. But if you start with bushes that are already 3 years old, you can often get a light harvest the very next season and a far bigger one the year after. Established root systems are going to pay you back faster, especially in a small garden where every plant has to earn its place. I've been growing blueberries for almost 13 years here in upstate South Carolina, in the ground, in raised beds, and containers. And the biggest lesson that I've learned is that native or regionally adapted varieties always perform best. My close friend has been growing rabbit eye blueberries for over a decade with almost zero maintenance besides mulching, and they get massive overflowing harvests every single year. Seeing that kind of production firsthand has made one thing very clear. When you choose native blueberry varieties, they become incredibly reliable, productive, and low maintenance, even in a small backyard like mine. Blueberries fruit based on winter chill hours, which means the number of hours between 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 45 during dormancy, and matching this requirement to your climate is everything. Northern high bush varieties need a lot of chill, for example, and they thrive in cooler climates. Southern high bush varieties need far fewer chill hours, and they're bred for warmer regions. Rabbit eyes kind of fall right in the middle, and they're naturally adapted to the southeast, which makes them the perfect fit for areas like here in upstate South Carolina. One thing to keep in mind, even if you have a variety that is self-fertile, unlike rabbit eye varieties, which are not, you still need at least 2 varieties of the same type that bloom at the same time to get the best results because of cross-pollination. The difference is noticeable bigger berries, sweeter flavor, and way larger harvests. Production usually starts lightly in year 2 or 3 for blueberries, and then it increases every year and then reaches its peak somewhere between years 6 and 10. This is exactly why buying older, well-established plants gives you such a head start. Rabbit eye varieties can grow 6 to 10 feet tall, which means you could use them as edible privacy bushes as long as you place them where they won't shade your vegetable garden. And that's kind of my plan for my garden next year, because I've got neighbors so close to me on either side. Instead of a regular privacy fence, why not have an edible one? If you have difficult soil like I do in my yard with red clay soil and concrete fragments, Blueberries can thrive in containers where you can control drainage and pH. A thick layer of mulch keeps them especially happy because it stabilizes moisture, protects shallow roots, and it's similar to the forest floor environment that they evolved in. It's the simplest, highest impact thing that you can do for them, and if blueberries give you long-term payoff, the next perennial gives you fast payoff, free plants, and a self-sustaining system that gets better every single year. Before we move on, here's something that might save you a lot of frustration and wasted space. If you want to grow high-value crops that actually earn their spot in a small garden, and ones that produce well, perform in your climate, and even cut down your grocery bill, I put 2 free resources below in the description. My 28 Proven Varieties Guide covers a wide range of food crops that I've tested over 13 years, and the free training walks you through the small garden system I rebuilt after downsizing. Again, both links are in the description below. So I've been growing strawberries for over a decade now, and I've made just about every mistake along the way. But the biggest thing that I've learned is that strawberries pay you back quickly when you understand how they grow and manage them with a simple system. They're perfect for raised beds, containers, and patios because they don't require much space to produce a lot of food. You plant once, and with a little intention, they become one of the most accessible crops you can grow, especially for small gardens. Back in 2019, I started my current lineage of Sequoia June-bearing berries in a raised bed, and I've propagated new plants from that same lineage ever since then through moving houses, downsizing, and rebuilding my garden from scratch. In my new space, I planted around 80 to 90 plants, all from runners that I propagated. And that's the beauty of strawberries. Once you get the rhythm down, you never have to buy plants again. Strawberries are perennials that go dormant or slow down in winter, especially in colder climates, but the crowns stay alive and then they wake up in early spring. They send out runners that grow into new baby plants, and without a plan, those runners can take over and reduce production. But managing them is simple. In year 1, you remove the blossoms and most of the runners so that the plant can build a strong root system. Then in the fall of the first year or early in spring of year 2, let the runners take root and then transplant them into a new bed or a container. Year 2 is when the original plants are going to give you the best harvest, and their babies should have blossoms and runners removed. By year 3, the original bed is going to begin to decline, and the runner plants that you propagated will be the strong producers. You can repeat this cycle forever, planting the grandbabies into fresh soil and composting the oldest plants as they age out. So where you plant strawberries matters more than people think. They love full sun, like 6 to 8 hours a day, but then there are varieties like Alpine that can tolerate more shade, and those work well in balconies or partial sun patios. In hot southern summers though, strawberries do appreciate some shade, and raised beds or containers can make that easier. Soil is another big factor. Strawberries do best in a slightly acidic, rich, well-draining mix. Heavy clay, like the red clay I deal with here, stresses them out, and that's why I prefer raised beds and containers. In those environments, I can control the soil pH better with something gentle like Espoma soil acidifier, and then I can make sure that they can get consistent moisture without waterlogging the crowns. Choosing the right variety is crucial. There are 3 main types. June bearing gives you 1 or 2 massive flushes with tons of runners, and that's perfect for propagation. Everbearing produces smaller harvests, stays compact, and works great in containers. Day neutral gives continuous production in cooler temperatures, but they have fewer runners, so that they're often grown as annuals. My personal favorite is Sequoia. It's technically June bearing, but it behaves more like an everbearing plant. So there's a big early crop and then steady smaller harvest into fall, but tons of runners. It has given me the largest, best tasting strawberries I've ever grown here in the South. So propagation really is the key to an endless supply of strawberries, as long as you're growing a variety like a June bearing one that produces a lot of runners, and then you can get that fast payoff with unlimited free plants. The next perennial is even simpler. It practically grows itself and gives you fresh flavor all season long. By the way, if this is helpful so far, let me know in the comments which perennial you're excited to try first. I'd love to hear what you're growing. Chives are one of the easiest and most rewarding perennial herbs you can grow, and in a small space garden, they're one of those crops that quietly earns their spot year after year. They tolerate heat, cold, inconsistent conditions, and they come back reliably every spring. Here in Zone 8A, mine tend to reappear in February, and once they start growing, they produce fast, tender shoots that are perfect for everything from omelets and scrambled eggs to potatoes, soups, salads, sandwiches, and more. Like scallions, I tend to harvest them just above the soil, and they grow back with even more tender, flavorful foliage. One of my favorite things about chives is how naturally they lend themselves to division and transplanting. They form clumps that multiply each year, and dividing them is one of the easiest ways to get brand new plants for free. I divide mine every year or like every other year, not just to increase my supply, but to keep each clump healthy and productive. When I split a mature clump into smaller groups of 3 or 4 and then move them into fresh soil, they take off really fast. Because they're perennial, I don't want them taking up valuable real estate in my raised beds where I rotate annual crops, and that's why I grow most of my chives in containers and grow bags. They've thrived for years there, and they stay contained instead of spreading by self-seeding throughout an entire bed, which I definitely learned the hard way years ago when chives started popping up everywhere. Containers also make it easier to manage the soil, the drainage, and the nutrients, especially later in the season when chive foliage can start looking a little tired, and then they benefit from a fresh start. Over the years, I've honed a simple soil mix for grow bags that keeps chives thriving. I use a blend of potting soil and compost, usually mushroom compost when my homemade supply is low. Lately, I've been adding wool pellets because they hold moisture so well, especially good for grow bags, and they slowly release nitrogen, which has made my chive transplants just thrive. Chives are one of those perennials that feel almost too easy, but the next group of herbs goes even further. They're low maintenance, incredibly flavorful, beautiful, and once you plant them, they reward you for years with hardly any effort. My core perennial herb bundle is 6 plants: lavender, rosemary, thyme, oregano, sage, and mint. Lavender and rosemary, depending on the varieties, can work as compact, fragrant shrubs in containers. Thyme spills over the edges like a ground cover, and oregano can grow into lush mounds. Sage adds a really pretty texture, and pineapple sage gives me these gorgeous red blooms that pollinators love in late summer. And mint stays contained in pots so that it can't take over, and it's perfect for teas, baking, and homemade extracts. When I downsized and rebuilt my smaller garden, these were some of the first plants I added back in. I tucked compact lavender and lemon thyme into my Vigo self-watering planters, and added spicy oregano and more lavender into my little 2x2 self-watering planter. I put mini rosemary into pots by my front porch. So you can really tuck these perennials in anywhere you have space and sun. These have all provided instant structure while everything else rotated around them through the seasons. Perennial herbs are the definition of high value in a small space. They fit naturally into containers. They tolerate being crowded more gracefully than most crops do. And they're perfect for filling little empty corners where you want something beautiful, functional, and low maintenance. And unlike annual herbs which need to be replaced every season, these plants come back stronger every year. If these herbs make your garden feel established, the next perennial takes it to a whole new level. Superfood fruit in containers years before most people think it's possible. Fruit trees are one of the best long-term perennials you can grow, but most people assume they need a big yard, perfect soil, or years of waiting before they ever see fruit. I used to think the same thing, especially in my small backyard with its red clay, tree roots, and chunks of old concrete in the soil. But once I realized how beautifully certain fruit trees can grow in containers, I've opened my mind to it. Figs are one of the easiest and most reliable container fruit trees, especially in warmer climates. There are compact varieties to choose from, and I've been told by my favorite local nursery that they naturally tolerate confined roots, which makes them ideal for pots, and they produce extremely well without perfect soil conditions. My friend who grows rabbit-eye blueberries also grows figs, and their harvests are enormous. They barely fuss with them, just sunlight and mulch, yet they get bowl after bowl of sweet figs every summer. Frozen figs straight from the freezer on a hot day are honestly one of the best treats ever. Seeing those harvests up close made me realize how high value figs are for a small garden. They give you a huge payoff and a compact footprint, and like blueberries, if you start with a tree that's a couple years old, you'll start harvesting fruit a lot sooner. Pomegranates are another surprisingly adaptable option, especially when you choose the right cold hardy variety if you need to. I didn't even know we could grow them here in upstate South Carolina until I found a variety called Salavatsky. I think I'm saying that right. I found it at my local favorite nursery. Learning that certain varieties can tolerate temperatures down to around 0 degrees completely changed what I thought was possible in my small space. I planted mine in a Vigo rolling self-watering planter, which has been perfect. It gives me drainage control, consistent moisture, and the ability to move the tree if I need to protect it during extreme cold, because sometimes we do drop below 0 here. Container fruit trees also give you something essential in small space gardening, and that is control. You choose the soil, you control the water, and you decide the location, and the container naturally keeps the tree compact without heavy pruning. This makes fruit trees one of the most realistic, rewarding perennial options for tiny backyards, patios, decks, or even rented spaces where planting in the ground isn't possible. You don't have to wait 10 years to see fruit, and with the right varieties and setup, you can get meaningful harvests much sooner than most gardeners realize. And if fruit trees bring long-term payoff and a compact footprint, this last one might surprise you, because most of us have been growing it as an annual without realizing that it can live for years. And I'll be honest, I've been growing them as annuals for more than a couple decades as part of my routine, but now that I've downsized and really leaned into small space, high value gardening, overwintering peppers makes a ton more sense. If a single pepper plant can give you multiple years of earlier, heavier harvests without restarting from seed every spring, that's a huge win for a small garden. The process is simple. You prune the plant back hard, you pot it up if it isn't already in a container, and then bring it in somewhere that's frost-free. Peppers don't need to grow in winter, they just need to stay alive. So indoors in a cool, dark spot, they slow down into a dormant state. You water lightly, like every 1 to 3 weeks, just to keep the roots from drying out. And of course, keep an eye out for pests that may have been brought in with them, and then just let the plant rest. And then spring comes and the plant wakes up with a fully developed root system and woody stems that are already a year old. Many gardeners keep pepper plants alive for 3 to 5 years this way, and certain varieties, especially like hot peppers like cayennes and habaneros, they can live for 10 years or more. I haven't overwintered peppers myself yet, but now that my space is dialed in and every plant needs to pay me back quickly, overwintering is one of those strategies that I'm seriously considering. It saves time, money, weeks of seed starting, and a lot of grow light space. When you look at all 7 of these perennials together, this is what happens when you stop treating your garden like a one-year project and start thinking in seasons and systems. Your small garden becomes a steady source of real food. If you want to take this further, grab my free 28 proven varieties guide and my free training below. The training walks you through the exact system I used to rebuild my entire garden after downsizing, so you too can grow more food with less overwhelm, no matter your space. Both are linked in the description. And if you want another video that'll help you get even more from a tiny garden, watch my video on 5 vegetables that keep producing the more you harvest. It's the perfect next step. Thanks for watching, and tell me in the comments which perennial you're planting first. See you in the next one.